Greetings everyone, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, here to bring you another episode review from Season 6 of The Loud House. Today's episode is titled, Driver's Dread. First we'll discuss the plot, and then my thoughts and critiques with my final score. So, let's get right into it. In this episode, Leni wants to meet up with Lori for a weekend shopping sale, and when she can't find a ride, she attempts to once again get her driver's license, which doesn't really go all that well in the beginning. However, thanks to Lisa's latest invention, Leni manages to pass her driver's test with a self-driving Vanzilla. But when the self-driving feature malfunctions, Leni overcomes her earlier fears and successfully gets the car under control, and at last meets up with Lori as a new and confident driver. Well, that concludes the plot of the episode, so now we come to my thoughts and critiques. I know the ending to this episode was already spoiled 1 week prior to the original air date, but to finally see how the episode got to the ending was still very satisfying. It should go without saying the two biggest positives of the episode were Leni and the story itself, and in my opinion, no other character could have worked this story better than her, at least going based off the last time she tried to get her driver's license. This episode is a follow-up to the Season 1 episode Driving Miss Hazy, and we even get a visual callback to the final scene where Leni was in the carpool lane. The only difference, of course, being how Leni sounded more concerned in this episode's flashback, while she sounded more obliviously upbeat in the original. If I'm being honest, I prefer this episode over Driving Miss Hazy. She's not learning to drive from what is basically a rule-free video game, and no one was trying to sabotage her for their own benefit. She was legitimately learning to drive in a more believable way, and yet both episodes and their similar plots are conceptually very much down to earth and very relatable. Another noteworthy difference between these two driving episodes is, unlike Miss Hazy, where Leni's driving failures are either only mentioned by the police officer or shown as a quick flashback, Driver's Dread shows the audience Leni's failures as they are happening in real time. I actually like that approach a lot more, since you get a better feel for what Leni was going through, and her frustrations can be more easily conveyed when they're seen and not simply heard. But before I talk more about Leni, it's important that I talk about the story since it relates to her character and to all of us. The episode was about the typical story of a teenager who wants to go places, but they inevitably have to get behind the wheel of a car at some point in order to achieve that goal. You can't rely on other people to drive you around forever, you know? Leni said the idea of driving scares her and doesn't want to do it again because of her previous failures, and I in good faith cannot criticize her in what she said. Learning to drive can be very nerve-wracking when you're a teenager, and for obvious reasons. You're worried you might get involved in an accident, and you may end up hurting yourself and possibly someone else. And don't even get me started on having to deal with the more aggressive drivers who seriously need to take it down a few notches. Basically, Leni's lack of self-confidence should not be looked down upon because driving is a big responsibility for any teenager to undertake. Eventually, however, you do have to step out of your comfort zone when learning to drive. That's why I'm not really that critical of Mr. Bullhoffner's trial by fire method of teaching Leni to speed up and merge with the flow of traffic on the freeway, because he honestly wasn't wrong to tell Leni what she needed to do. Minus the blindfold part, of course. If you don't pace yourself correctly and start losing your cool, something bad is probably going to happen, and that's certainly what happened to Leni. Despite his angry and raised voice attitude, Mr. B was objectively the more realistic instructor compared to Mr. Grouse, who just fell asleep barely a few seconds after Leni started driving. Then Todd the robot started teaching Leni, which actually made sense considering he was driving her and the other kids in the episodes High Crimes and Dine and Bash. Come to think of it, why didn't Leni just ask him for a ride to the mall? Oh yeah, plot convenience, that's right. Anyway, on the one hand, Todd wasn't capable of raising his voice and falling asleep, so Leni felt a little more comfortable learning from him, but on the other hand, she still couldn't master parallel parking. To be fair, parallel parking is one of the hardest driving skills to learn when you're first starting out, so Leni banging into the cars between her was to be expected. The training montage may have been overly cartoony and exaggerated just like the training and testing was in Driving Miss Hazy, but it was a good way of visually demonstrating how challenging it can be when first learning to drive, and how some of the worst case scenarios can realistically happen if you're not confident behind the wheel. So with that in mind, let's talk about Leni. It may be a long shot, but I believe this was Leni's best episode of the series, and not just for the fact she was presented as her usual ditzy but lovable character. Out of every previous episode where she tries to prove something to herself, this one here was, in my opinion, her best performance in overcoming something that that has always prevented her character from being more than what she was capable of being, that being a safe and responsible driver, and the stakes of overcoming this underlying fear were significantly higher this time around. Many of us assumed she was never going to get her license after so much time had passed following the first season, and thought that was the direction the show was going to take with her character from there on out. However, much like the episodes Shop Girl, Leader of the Rack, and The Boss Maybe, she was placed in a situation where she had to step out of her comfort zone and develop more self-confidence when it came to something she both wanted and undoubtedly had to do. The way Mr. Bullhoffner shouted at her, Mr. Grouse falling asleep on her, and Todd trying to explain parallel parking all played a role leading up to the real driving test after she was handed her license. When the self-driving feature Lisa installed in Vanzilla went on the fritz, the only thing Leni could do was turn it off and drive on her own. She may have been scared, but she had to take control of the situation before something life-threatening happened, and that's something all drivers have to learn to deal with when they're out on the road alone. Leni had her own Bullhoffner trial by fire moment in avoiding collisions, despite a few zany mishaps and near calls along the way, successfully parallel parked without someone being too technical on how to do it, and of course with Tanya not being alive, she did all of that as if the person in the passenger seat was sleeping the whole time. Leni learned right then and there that she could drive all along, she just needed the confidence to do it. Her 3 instructors helped in building that confidence, and the lessons she learned are the same ones we all have to learn when driving. We have to learn to be more assertive and not feel so overwhelmed. You can't always have someone telling you what to do and when to do it, and maybe you shouldn't take parking lessons from robots. That last one really doesn't fit with the overarching theme, I know, but it's still true though. In other words, sometimes you just have to tune everyone out, trust your own instincts, and believe in yourself. And Leni flying solo was a big growing moment for her character. My only critique to the episode would be the self-driving feature Lisa placed inside Vanzilla. Leni said she didn't know how to stop the car when that feature was turned on, even though she stopped the car before, during, and after her driving test with no issues. Unless Lisa had pre-programmed Vanzilla for the road test and to drive to the outlet mall, both in terms of map directions and speed limits, Leni telling Tanya she didn't know how to stop doesn't really hold up too well when we clearly saw the car starting and stopping just fine. Either way, having the self-driving feature on Vanzilla break down was like taking off the final set of training wheels, and at last Leni became the new sibling driver for the Loud House. So hopefully we no longer have to see Todd being the one to shuttle everyone around. Sounds a little mean to say, but he's a robot and robots are not supposed to have feelings, so there you go. Overall, this episode did a tremendous job of developing Leni's character for the better, and finally capping off the long-awaited and technically forgotten goal of her getting a driver's license. In typical cartoon fashion, the story featured the relatable and real-life challenge of teenagers learning to drive, and the main takeaway is to not let all the doubt and voices both inside and outside your head stop you from achieving your goals. Learning to drive can be very scary at first, and most likely you're not going to become an expert overnight, but with practice and keeping a level head in spite of what some instructors may put you through can really go a long way. Building upon the continuity from Driving Miss Hazy and proving she's more confident than she gave herself credit for, this, in my opinion, was the highest moment for Leni's character, and she's in a much better place now than she was back in the first season. With that said, I give Driver's Dread a 9.9 out of 10. Well folks, that concludes my review of Driver's Dread. I will end this review with something I couldn't help but take notice of when it came to Leni's mannequin. Is it just me, or did it seem like Tanya's size kept changing throughout the episode? First she looked relatively small when she was sitting on Leni's bed, and then her head was gigantic when she was in the car. I don't know why that caught my attention so much, it just did. Then again, Leni believes a mannequin can drink liquids and use the bathroom, so maybe I'm not the only crazy one here. But anyway, as far as the rest of the episode goes, what did you guys think of it? Love it? Hate it? Something you would add? Change? Keep it as it is? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe to this channel for the latest Loud House content. That's going to do it for me. I'll catch you guys for the next video, but until then, this is SteamTeamRedubUK, CC Trainor-Ling, signing off. Peace out, home slices.